For the past 20 years, the CDC has tracked risky behavior in teenagers. The latest survey was released just last week. Dr. Joshua Weiner joins us this morning with a look at the results and how they compare with past results. And good morning.
Good morning, Barbara.
So are teenagers more risky or less risky than they were during the last survey?
I think people are going to be really surprised to hear me say that teens are doing really well when it comes to risky behavior. Actually, for almost every measure that is checked in this survey, so these would be things like drinking before the age of 13, drinking in general, binge drinking, marijuana use, driving in a car without a seatbelt, driving while drunk, having sex early. Almost all of these things have shown improvement now versus 1991 when the CDC first conducted the survey.
Wow, but there's still so many risky things that teenagers do. I was mentioning to you, we had a story yesterday about this car surfing with teens standing on the top of cars. Why do they do things like that? I mean, we'd have to go back a few years to know why our group was doing it when we were teenagers, but what is it?
Oh, well, I think there are several factors. Number one, it's the invincibility of being a teen. You never think that something bad is going to happen to you. I think that also we have to take into consideration brain development. The frontal lobe, which is the last part of the brain to fully mature, it doesn't reach full maturity until you're in your early 20s. That's the part of the brain that's involved in judgment, and that's not fully matured when you're a teenager, so you're doing things that are showing some lack of judgment sometimes.
So if they're being less risky, what do you think is contributing to that?
I actually think that the main contributing factor to less risky behavior is the media's attention to these issues over the years. I think these things are just more in the public's awareness. Schools and parents are more aware of things like binge drinking and underage sex and drug use, and I think they're talking about it more, and I think that's leading to the numbers going down. On the flip side of that, though, I think that because it's more in the media spotlight, I think most people perceive these problems as being worse than they were 20 years ago, when in fact the opposite is the case.
Well, I think some of us in the media worry, too, that when we tell a story about some of the risky things, like I was just mentioning, the car surfing, that maybe we're suggesting to teens that here's something you can do. And I think with YouTube and some of those places that they can go and see these things going on, you worry that maybe they'll jump into that as well.
Right. I think that's a legitimate concern. In fact, you know, things like suicide, reporting on teen suicides, there have been studies that have shown that there's a contagion effect. So more kids will start committing suicide as a result of hearing about it in the media. But I still think that in general, the media is providing an important role, which is to highlight what's going on in the public so people are aware, they know what to look out for.
Now, we understand that marijuana use, though, is on the rise compared to cigarette use.
Right.
Why is that? That's considered more risky than plain cigarettes, or do teens think no?
Well, I don't know. It's a tough call, right? Because cigarettes, when people smoke cigarettes, they're smoking a lot of cigarettes as opposed to marijuana, where they're smoking just every once in a while. So the health risks is tough to compare. But the interesting thing here is that for the first time in the CDC study, there are more kids smoking marijuana in the last 30 days than those that smoke cigarettes. So that's a first in the 20 years of this survey. But it doesn't tell the whole picture, which is that 10 years ago, actually, more kids were smoking marijuana than today. So again, I think that you have to keep that in perspective. A lot of people think that the decreased stigma associated with marijuana, the medical marijuana industry, and the legalization of marijuana in certain states is leading more kids to think that marijuana is safe. But in fact, kids are still using less marijuana now than they were a decade ago. So
in general, the news is good about our teenagers.
I think
that's good to hear.
you know, I was really pleased when I read this, and quite frankly, I was surprised by some of these things. Even though I deal with this stuff all the time, I thought it was great to see that on the whole, kids are doing better than we think.